remember waking up one morning or being awoken to these light beings that were floating from my neighbor's house, coming up to me into the bedroom window and waving and smiling. And I remember laying there feeling like in awe, just like, wow, you don't, at that age, you don't put it, but it was still a vivid memory to this day. And I never used to really speak about it, but there was, I think, 3 or 4 of them, and they were just rotating around. And this went on for about 10 minutes.
Alright, so in today's video I'm going to be talking about Norse mythology. It's been a while since I've been wanting to dabble into mythology and all of these things. I want to talk about Christian mythology, Eastern mythology, Egyptian mythology, Native American mythology, Norse mythology, Celtic mythology. It's all very interesting, and it's all talking about the same thing. I'm going to be making the argument here, comparing some of these Norse mythology with some of the Eastern mythology and some of the Abrahamic mythology and so on and so forth. Specifically, what I want to talk about is this theme that is not very known in Norse mythology. Norse mythology has become very prominent in sci-fi and in fantasy because the Lord of the Ring touches upon it, this idea of elves, and then we have the series of Vikings. It's all very interesting. So we have the Marvel comics as well with Thor and whatnot, and it merges a little bit of the fantasy and the mythology. So when we think about Norse mythology, we think about science fiction. We think about complete another fantasy. However, there are certain specific things about Norse mythology that not a lot of people know about, and one of these things are these quote-unquote light elves. We have the idea of high elves or whatnot as a higher race, but these light elves are something different. Now, in my previous video, I was talking about the existence of angels, quote-unquote angels, or divine intervention, and how they might be, there might be something aching to this quote-unquote divine intervention in some of the modern, the recent events that have been happening in the world. Now, I have all this research about the existence of these non-physical, quote-unquote, light beings or angels, or what you want to call them. Now, when we go into ancient scriptures, they are all throughout ancient scriptures, whether we're talking about Norse mythology, whether we're talking about Christian mythology, Manichaeanism, so on and so forth. I'm compiling all of this information to write a book called The Religion of Light, where I'm going to put all the perennial religion, all perennial philosophy, and probably making comparisons with the modern research. So who exactly are these light elves? Before I move forward, I would like to remind you that if you want to join the growing discussion on consciousness and would like to be notified on the latest scientific discoveries and theories surrounding this topic and how they connect to ancient mythologies and philosophies, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, as I'll try to upload at least 1 video per week as I continue with the outline. I'm gonna be bringing this this blog post here. This site. You can go into the about, you can see who's writing it. These are scholars, and I'm going to be bringing mainly I'm going to be looking into this article, but I'm also going to be bringing Wikipedia, because this is where we get all the basic ideas of the more perennial idea of all of this. And then, since I don't have a published research, usually when I bring up Wikipedia is because I have published research. So you don't want to believe Wikipedia, you go into the published research. But because this is going to go on perennial philosophy, I'm going to be posting and linking this article as well, where it's more about a scholar look into these quote-unquote light elves. But the whole thing is very interesting because it resembles the angels, quote-unquote, in Christian mythology. The whole idea of Manichaeanism, which I'll be going into, is really important. Manichaeanism, I haven't gone a lot into it, but I'm going to go into it. And everything is tying together, showing us that these quote-unquote angels might be a real thing that has been all throughout the ages. Alright, in Norse mythology, the Ljósálfar, the Dark Elves, and the Ljósálfar, and I'm sorry if I'm just butchering these names, we have the idea of elves. We even have the idea of dwarves and different types of elves. If you think about Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, it brought it to the mainstream, it brought it to the popular era. These themes have been known throughout history and fantasies and video games and whatnot. So we have this idea of elves and what elves are now. When we go into some of the Irish mythology, and this is something that I'm going to be covering as well, the Tuatha De Danann or Tuatha De Danann or something of that nature. Sorry if I'm butchering the name. It talks about these quote-unquote fairies, this whole idea of fairies or elves. They are the same thing. When we look at the word elf in English, we're talking about the fairies, of these shapeshifters, of these supernatural things that happen in the wilderness that help humans. You can think about these higher beings, this higher race of humanoids, or you can think about non-physical entities and actual fairies, however you want to perceive them, who are involved in the life of mortals somehow. So we're talking about the same thing, but now in Norse mythology, what we have is the dark elves and the light elves. So there's a distinction between these two. These live in Alfheimr, and are fairer than the sun to look at. So they have a specific place in heaven. So when we think about the heavens and to call them something, so there's this whole idea of this heaven realm in Norse mythology called Asgard, and they're just like some of the scriptures in Christianity says, there are many mentions in the celestial heavens, or whatever you want to call it. I cannot remember how it is right now. In Christianity, there's a lot of themes of many heavens. There are many these little pocket realms in Asgard. There's the Valhalla, there's the Helheim, and different places all over the place. This Helheim is not in Asgard; it's a different. So there are all these different little pocket realms, which are I made a video recently talking about how it is being proved by science that we create these quote-unquote simulations, or these heavens, or these pocket realms that are all throughout fantasy and epic narratives. They seem to be a real thing. So supposedly these light elves live in this Alfheimr, or however you pronounce this, is a specific realm. In Norse mythology, Alfheimr is home of the light elves. Some of these interesting. So the elves, as I said, the whole idea of elf is these supernatural things that happen in the wilderness, that you could call that an elf or a fairy or something like that. This was the whole idea. This idea of elves as tall beings with pointy ears is more of a science fiction thing. When we think about elves in the original sense of the word, it could have been anything, any sort of supernatural aspect of it. However, when we think about the Tuatha De Danann, it is talked about this race of very fair beings, very tall, very slender, very what they call beautiful, close to the idea of these Norse blonde humanoids. So both of them are correct. All right, so there's this theories and interpretations here. The question of Christian influence, whether this Norse mythology was influenced by Christian influences. We'll see these light elves resemble the angels of the more traditional Christian Abrahamic ideas. Even their own heaven, the Alfheimr, here Alfheimr, or whatever that's called, it resembles the idea of the Christian heaven. So they talk about the influence. It says subclassification perhaps resulted of Christian influence by way of importation of the concept of good and evil and angels of light and darkness. And Holzmark aired this view, though with some reservations, since good versus evil dualism is not confined to Christian thinking. This idea of dualism, good versus evil, has been all throughout Zoroastrianism and all the religions, all the mythologies, everything light and dark. You may call it the Ein Sof and so on and so forth. So when we think about Norse mythology, we go to the 13th century. This occurred primarily in the 13th century. These texts include the Prose Edda, composed in the 13th century by Icelandic scholar, law speaker, and historian Snorri Sturluson, and the Poetic Edda, a collection of poems from earlier traditional material anonymously compiled in the 13th century. So these were the folklore of the Icelandic peoples, of the Scandinavian people, just passed on by generations. Verbally, it was not written down until Snorri Sturluson, who was... These are the Middle Ages. This is when society started to evolve, and we were going into the era of the illustration, the illumination period, and so they were already looking into all of these things. When you think about these ancient scriptures and you think about the monks in the monasteries, these were high-profile priests and scholars studying these books, because all these ancient scriptures, you didn't have print, you didn't have all these ideas spread apart. So it's interesting that throughout different eras in history, completely unrelated, they came with the same ideas of dualism, and most importantly, this concept of light beings, of these beings. Now, when we go into Manichaeanism, I'm going to bring it here closely, we have this whole idea, and I haven't talked too much about Manichaeanism, but it's the same thing. It was a scholar from Babylon who met an angel, and the angel told him about certain things, the angel Eltom, or whatever it's called in some other text. So in other stories, in other texts, it says it's the twin flame of Mani, or some sort of supernatural being who was shown to him, and he told him about the universe. The interesting thing about Manichaeanism is that it is very specific in some of the teachings it says, and it goes more into the sci-fi idea, into matter and the non-physical. It's interesting. So a battle between the force and creation, many several writings between light and dark. So we see this dualism in a very specific theme. Now, when we think about Christianity, the whole idea of light and darkness, and the Lord is the light, and so on and so forth, we think that these are just mannerisms and matters of speaking, or allegories to the light, the righteousness, and so on and so forth. Now, when we're talking about light, and we start to see all of this research and all of these accounts, modern accounts in altered states of consciousness, we start seeing this quote-unquote light and these quote-unquote light beings as pragmatically light. People see a light, like literally a light. These are not allegories, it's about light. And now I have some videos in this channel talking about how when you go into the depth in quantum physics, you realize that everything in reality is a light, just like Nikola Tesla said at some point, supposedly, allegedly, everything is a light. And when we talk about light, we talk about electromagnetic energy in the electromagnetic spectrum. We don't really talk about the light that we see when we turn on the light. Alright, so as I was making this video, I went deeper into the rabbit hole of Norse mythology, of the Tuatha De Danann, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to bring up the idea that there are these quote-unquote light elves and these fairies, and it's very related to some of the research that I've been putting up in this channel related to these quote-unquote light beings and the beings that people experience in altered states of consciousness, in the research of near-death experiences, of psychedelics, and so on and so forth. It's the same thing. Sort of. But when I went deeper into Norse mythology and Irish mythology, I found the correlations between these and Manichaeanism, and I found things that even though I'm a huge fan of mythologies, I didn't know of these things. A lot of people don't know about these things, and there are a lot of very interesting correlations, and so this is gonna become a full-fledged playlist. I found things that I didn't know. This is gonna help the overall research that I'm doing in this channel, and it is real. It is right there. It's the same. It's the confirmation that we see. I thought these mythologies were a little bit more dealing with imagination and so on and so forth, and they are, of course. All mythologies and even religions are cultural filters of a larger truth. This is what I truly believe in. But when I thought about Norse mythology or some of these more fantastic mythologies, I thought it was a little bit more about legend and imagination. But when I went deeper into it, what I found is that it's all right there. The same thing that we're seeing in near-death experiences the same thing that we're doing, we're seeing in altered states of consciousness is right there in Norse mythology, and it ties with Christianity, it ties with Manichaeanism. As I said, I haven't spoken a lot about Manichaeanism, it's very important. All of this is going to be in a future book that I have planned called The Religion of Light. If you like this content, you find it interesting, please share, subscribe, and so on and so forth. I think I've been a little bit shadow banned by YouTube because these topics are not in the mainstream, they're not very marketable. So yeah, this is gonna become a full-on fledged playlist. Now, the one thing that I want to make clear in this video is that there's such a thing as the quote-unquote light elves. They have a pocket realm, as it is presented in altered states of consciousness. People go into a realm of light, people meet light beings there, and they are told this and that and so on and so forth. And also there is a complex dualism. So what scholars thought was that Snorri Sturluson, one of the main writers of these ancient texts dealing with Norse mythology, was perhaps influenced by Christianity, given that this was in the 13th century. Christianity was already starting to become the mainstream after the Dark Middle Ages, and they thought it was some sort of an influence. However, this is not the case, because we also have the same a very complex story involving a lot of themes and weird themes, including these gods intermingling with mortals and so on and so forth. So it's a very complex dualism that is repeating over different religions, different mythologies, which were completely untouched to each other. They were not communicating to each other. There was no print even. So how do they come with these complex mythologies and dualism? I think there's something deeper here. Anyway, look up for the playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. If you find any value in the content that I'm putting forward, please consider supporting the project through Patreon on the links below. Likewise, you can like, share, subscribe, comment, or follow me on other social media so more people have access to this information. Thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll see you in the next one.